Hey everyone, and welcome to the Intellectual Surge. My name is Danny, and in this episode on Spinoza's philosophy, we're going to talk about one of his most important concepts, God. If you're not familiar with philosophy, chances are you've heard about Spinoza through Albert Einstein. It might even be how you got to this video in the first place. In 1929, Albert Einstein was asked if he believed in God. He answered, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the harmony of all that exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and the doings of mankind." Albert Einstein actually described himself as a follower of Spinoza. But back to the topic, what is Spinoza's God? God is a central concept in Spinoza's philosophy. He actually dedicated the entire first book of the Ethics to define what God is. But you already understood from Einstein's quote that Spinoza's definition of God is pretty different from what we commonly call God. For Spinoza, God is equivalent to nature. It's the famous Deus SIve Natura, God or nature. In other words, God is everything that exists, has existed, and will exist, from the extremely small to the extremely large. And this definition is very close to how we define the universe today. If you look it up, the universe is defined as a totality of existence, which is exactly how Spinoza defines God or nature. But the analogy with the universe doesn't stop there, and this is where Spinoza's philosophy can get a bit tricky. Spinoza actually defines God as an infinite substance of particles that make everything that is. Those particles are fundamental building blocks that arrange themselves into more complex bodies. And those bodies will then arrange themselves into even more complex bodies, and so on and so on. So let's imagine that atoms are those particles. We know it's not the case today, right? Because there are protons, neutrons, electrons, and quarks and whatnot. But let's assume they are. And by the way, atoms literally means irreducible, which really fits the definition of Spinoza's substance of particle. So let's take atoms, and actually let's take atoms of hydrogen and oxygen. They can come together to create a more complex body, water for example, H2O. Water can interact with another body and end up being part of a cell, for example. From composition to compositions, the atoms we were talking about at the beginning will end up being part of your body. And with this example, we can already understand that the substance makes everything that exists by definition. So if we are the result of this substance, it means that we are not only in nature, but we are ourselves nature. And if we follow this logic, this means that we are God, just like a mountain, a table, a bottle, and everything that exists.
You ask me if I have a God complex? Let me tell you something. I am God.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than this. We are not God, but expressions of God. In other words, we are a way God expresses itself, just as everything else. Let's listen to my favorite French philosopher, Gilles Deleuze, on this topic.
Dès lors, les étants, cette substance unique absolument infinie, c'est l'être. L'être en tant qu'être. Les étants, dès lors, ne seront pas des êtres. Les étants, les existants, ne seront pas des êtres, ce seront quoi? On a vu la réponse. Ce seront ce que Spinoza appelle très précisément des modes de la substance absolument infinie. Et un mode, c'est quoi? C'est pas un être, un mode. C'est une manière d'être. C'est une manière d'être. Donc, les étants, les existants ne sont pas des êtres. Il n'y a comme être que la substance absolument infinie. Dès lors, nous qui sommes des étants, nous qui sommes des existants, nous ne serons pas des êtres, nous serons des manières d'être de cette substance.
So it's going to be a bit hard for me to exactly translate what Deleuze just said, but what he was saying is that basically we are not beings. There is only one being, and this being is God. It's the substance, it's nature. What we are is ways of the being, a manner nature expresses itself, a mode of nature, as Deleuze puts it. But why is this distinction between the being and the ways of being so important? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because the being, that is to say God or nature, is absolutely infinite. This means that it doesn't die. The particles just enter new compositions. The being or substance really is the creative force behind everything, and that's what Spinoza called natura naturans, meaning nature naturing. But the expressions of nature are finite on the other hand. They die when their compositions decompose. Let's take a wooden chair, for example. If we burn it, the particles that were part of that chair will enter a new composition, the smoke, for example. But the chair in itself won't exist anymore, because it would have lost its compositions. This is really different from nature naturing. This is natura naturata, which means nature natured. Nature naturing and nature natured are two different ways of seeing the same thing. But in one hand, we consider the infinite creative substance, and on the other hand, we consider the finite results from nature. In other words, the expressions of God. So you probably already started to understand why Spinoza had some problem with the religious authorities of Amsterdam. His conception of God really is different from what we find in religion, and that's really something we saw with Einstein's quote at the beginning of this video. But you know what, I'll leave this topic for the next episode. Let's do a quick recap of what we've learned today. We learned that Spinoza's God is equivalent to nature, that is to say, everything that exists has existed and will exist. We also learned that God is an infinite substance of particles that arrange themselves in everything that is. We also saw that we are not beings, but finite expressions of the infinite being. And finally, we've learned that there are two ways of conceiving God. Through its finite expressions, that is nature natured, or through its infinite substance, that is to say nature naturing. Thanks everyone for watching this video on Spinoza's God or Nature. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments and ask whatever questions come to your mind. Cheers everyone, and don't forget to subscribe to get more of that good stuff.